You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. This week, we look at network segmentation and how it can prevent ransomware from tearing through your organization. My co-host Prasanna and I talked to Dr. Mike Saylor, my co-author on learning ransomware response and recovery. And we talk about, first off, we talk about what it actually is, what VLANs are, how they figure into this, the need to talk principle, and also microsegmentation. We start with the UCSF ransomware attack as a good case study. They did get hit, but they weren't destroyed, basically because they got this right. We talk about how to do this without destroying everything. Not that I've ever done that. Anyway, just a quick note about me. I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been obsessing over backup recovery and now cyber recovery for over 30 years. If that's your bag, then I'm your guy. You're not going to find anyone that cares about it more than me. Ever since 1993, when I had to tell my boss there were no backups of that production database that we lost. Now I've written 5 books, a blog, and a podcast. Here we turn unappreciated admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Hi folks, wanted to mention my new book, Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, which is now available for pre-order at Amazon.com. I wrote it with my co-author, Dr. Mike Saylor, who's a blue team cyber defense expert. He really knows his stuff. There are dozens of books to tell you how not to get ransomware. Our book starts with the assumption you're probably going to get ransomware. So we tell you how to respond to it and how to recover from it. It's unlike anything else out there. We tell you what you need to do now to be able to respond when it happens. We covered defenses to reduce the blast radius, how to protect your backup system, incident response procedures, negotiation strategies, backup recovery techniques, and how to prevent it from happening again. The tech reviewers gave it overwhelmingly positive feedback, so I think it's going to be a big seller. Pre-order it now. Search for Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, or just look for my name, W. Curtis Preston. Hope you like it. Welcome to the Backup Wrap-Up. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, a.k.a. Mr. Backup, and I have a guy who continues to surprise me at the stuff he knows about. I don't remember what it was, Prasanna, but just like the other day, we were talking, and you were like, you started talking about something else.
What?
Where you're like, are you surprised that I know this? And then it was something yet again where I'm like, of course you are aware of I don't know what it was, but something. Prasanna, Malayandi, how's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good, Kurt. You know what it might have been? Was it our discussions around PoE?
Probably was about PoE. Yeah, exactly. The power over Ethernet for those uninformed. I've been living PoE quite a bit lately because I've been basically reinstalling, replacing all of the cameras in a updating. Thank you. Taking a PoE based security camera system for a preschool. And it's been a journey, and lots of time on ladders, and good times. I have yet to fall or anything. I have drawn blood at least once, but anyway,
that's expected though.
Yeah, it is expected. But anyway, and then we have our intrepid cybersecurity professional, Dr. Mike Saylor. How's it going, Mike?
Well, guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am. No one at home knows how much effort we went into today to get you to sound good. We were having so
Usually
much difficulty.
A voice changer would do that, but today was microphone troubleshooting.
That was something. Yeah.
But wait, Curtis, before you go on, I think it's been a while. You should probably sort of give a bit of background about Dr. Mike.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because I know we've been having him on a bunch recently on the podcast,
Yes.
So I think it might be worthwhile.
Yeah. So Mike is the co-author on this book here, Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, that was published just last month. Although he and I are still, it's so new that he and I are still waiting for our own little copies and it's going to be like a competition, we need a pool to see who gets their copies first. Mike, of course, he did the cyber part of this book, and I did the backup and DR part of this book. And honestly, I think it was an incredible, I was about to say marriage. Let's not do that. Partnership, incredible partnership. And Mike, I don't know if I told you, but our editor said that she had actually never seen a team that worked as well together as you and I did, because I mean, it was such a clear delineation of expertise, and you clearly know your stuff. I clearly know my stuff. And this is one of those books where you really need stuff on both sides, right? And
And it
many of our,
doesn't feel like two
what's that?
separate books.
And it doesn't feel like two separate books, right? We worked really hard to keep the voice consistent. And, that was, Mike is clearly way smarter than I am. So I just have to use lots of big words when I talk. So, but yeah, so that's why Mike has been visiting us so much on the podcast and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Today, we're going to talk about another cyber-related topic. And Mike, why don't you start us off with a story?
There's so many good stories, but one of the stories we'll talk about is healthcare related, because they are one of the highest targeted industries for a number of reasons. One, it's easy to leverage them. If you can bring the hospital down and you want to get paid in return for restoring hospital operations, that's good leverage. Patient data is pretty valuable. Both from a identity theft perspective, but then believe it or not, big pharma and some of these other less than reputable companies are willing to pay for patient like oncology reports and like, what could we sell this person, or what data could we use to promote our new drugs or procedures. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but nonetheless, University of California, San Francisco,
UCSF.
UCSF. In an industry full of acronyms, sometimes I get them wrong. So University of California, San Francisco got hit with ransomware.
When was
it's
this?
not real clear how it happened, but when?
Yeah.
It's probably like five years ago, 2020 maybe.
Yeah.
Which is another topic of discussion is, that even though it's been 5 years, the way bad guys compromised them and how that whole thing went is still current. It's still stuff that happens today and yet, tomorrow. It's nothing that we've done in the last 5 years has helped mitigate this. And in this particular case, it was what we believe, or they believe, to be compromised credentials. So it wasn't a phishing attack. It wasn't, bad guys, truly kicking down the door. It was likely remote access or VPN credentials that were harvested some other way. Whether they were easily guessed or, former employee didn't get turned off, that kind of thing. So ransomware group got access, deployed their ransomware, and, people started having a bad day. The good part of that, though, is I think the topic of today, which is network segmentation. This environment was very well segmented for any number of reasons. One of them could just be compliance. HIPAA compliance in healthcare strongly advises, if not in some cases with regard to confidential or sensitive information like healthcare records, requires segmentation. This group did very well at segmenting their core IT environment from their healthcare operating environment, from their lab environment. And so when one part of that network got infected, it was contained within that segment.
Mike,
and that's one of the reasons why this environment didn't completely shut down.
And Mike, for some of our listeners who may not be as familiar with the network side of things, could you provide a bit more context around like what is network segmentation? Why is it important? That sort of thing as we walk through this?
Sure. And there's a number of analogies we can use in the book. We talk about kind of comparing it to a warehouse where you'd have different sections of the warehouse. Even if it's just two, you've got the office air conditioned section and then the warehouse unair conditioned section. In my case, when I worked at a warehouse, at least the bathroom was air conditioned. So that's where I went to take my naps. But in company environments, and it's not just for security, it's also for management and maintenance and bandwidth control. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to network segmentation, backups, and there's different ways to approach it. So there's strategy behind this too. It's not just, marketing has its own segment, or the first floor is a different segment than the second floor, or your production network is a different segment than your voice over IP network. The idea is, how do we organize our environment from an operations and management perspective? So now we can truly measure and manage network traffic, anomalies, troubleshooting. But then from a security perspective, whenever we create these segments, we can also apply access control rules depending on the hardware you have, the network hardware, so routers and switches. We can control who can access that segment. So marketing, or maybe we put a HR and legal in their own segment. So in payroll, maybe accounting. So the rest of the company, that doesn't need to worry themselves about paying the bills and HR records and legal holds on data. All that stuff is truly protected. Or depending on your business, whatever your prized jewel, whatever your prized jewels are, your data, your shipping logs, whatever it is, intellectual property, put that in a secure segment or container. You can think of it that way too, and restrict who has access to it and what can happen at a lot of different levels, right? It's not just the user, it's also the type of network traffic, the services, the protocols, you can even limit bandwidth. There's a lot you can do when you look at that type of network architecture strategy.
And I think that a lot of people probably easily associate with sort of Wi-Fi networks having like the guest network that you hand out to everyone, where they get no access to anything other than the internet, versus like people who might be logging into like the corporate network or their home network, where they have access to devices and they're streaming things and other things like that.
And guess what? If for those of you that are like, I will absolutely never do network segmentation, if you have a wireless network at home and you've separated, when your neighbor's kids come over and they can't access your secret lab, you've only given them internet access, you've done segmentation.
That's what I did,
Interesting.
and it does cause issues sometimes. And and I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll talk later about firewall and how do you connect these segments and all the rest of that. But yes, it does lead to some issues.
Yeah, we have tenants here at the house. Like we're renting rooms out, and I created a guest network for them. And then of course they wanted to print. And I was like, dang it. Printer's on the wrong segment, which meant that either I have to give them access or I have to go on the guest network to print, whichever, one or the other is going to work. So, and by the way, luckily this recording was segmented because I just got a call from my daughter, able to take that without destroying the rest of the recording. If your adult daughter calls, you got to take the call, right? That doesn't happen all the time. So let's talk about, hang on a second. Yeah. Okay. So am I right in assuming, Mike, that the key tool in network segmentation are VLANs?
The key tool is network devices that would support segmentation.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
The old school way is still just as effective. It's just not as easy. It's not it's not an interface that I can log into and just drag and drop and click buttons. I've got to do some command line, right? So let's friendly.
Let's go back. Let's go back to that old school way. The old school way was literally, you got to switch for this, you got to switch for this, and never the twain shall meet. Is that what you're saying? And that now we have VLANs. What is a VLAN?
Well, a VLAN is a capability of a switch. So newer switches, and I say new, but the VLAN capable switches have been around for 10 or more years.
New to those of us with gray in our beards.
So the older switches still could do segmentation, but you would have to you'd plug a console cable into the back of the switch, and you would bring up a command prompt, and you would have to physically type and know what to type, the commands and the configuration of the segments that you want to create. And, heaven forbid, now we've got to add security with access control and other things. That's more typing and more things you have to know. And, it prone to mistakes. And from a backup perspective, also something you would want to back up. So if that switch died and you need to put a new switch in, you've got a backup of that config for all those segments. Because if you don't, then your network is broken and everybody's upset. On the newer switches, newer, even, being around 10, 15 years, you still log into the switch, but you can do it over the network. You don't have to have a console cable. You hit the IP address, you get a nice user interface like a web page, and there are tabs and buttons and blanks to fill in. And as you interact with this interface, it's writing all that code in the back end to create these VLANs. And now it's a graphic, dashboard that shows you all your VLANs. You can name them, you can apply restrictions, you can do reporting. I mean, it's pretty easy to use.
And so with VLANs, right, you're basically creating those segments that you had talked about earlier, right, Mike? So you might have say a VLAN ID of 10, which is your production network, maybe a VLAN ID of 20, which is your guest network, maybe a VLAN ID of 40, which is your HR network. And in most cases, once you configure it, these VLANs should not cross unless you give access for them to communicate with each other. Now, I know there are some systems out there where once you create a VLAN, it allows traffic by default, which isn't always the best approach, right? I know, Curtis, we've talked a lot about sort of, okay, shut everything down and then sort of add things back. And so I think from a VLAN perspective, yeah, you want those isolated except for the things which should be allowed to talk across each other.
You're right. And I think the majority of devices that support VLANs do unrestricted by default. So it's going to start with everybody can talk to this segment. And so, and I don't think VLAN stands for virtual local area network. And so when we talk about segmentation, within this company network, you've got the local area network, the LAN. And when you create a segment by itself, it's not necessarily a different LAN, but when you restrict it, it becomes kind of a LAN.
Mm-hmm.
So because you've got to have access to it, just like you would the normal company network. Well, very similarly, when we talk about VLANs, because it's virtual, I'm not adding new hardware. I'm just adding or taking advantage of the capability of this new switch, this new router, this new gear that allows me to virtually configure. And the way that works is, if you can think of a network device and it's got all the plugs, the jacks where you can, plug in a network cable, whether it's, 8 or 16 or 32. When you go into the VLAN console, it shows you a picture of the front of this device or the back where all these jacks are. And you click on the ones that you want in this VLAN. So it's both physical and virtual from the perspective that it's applying logic to the traffic within the device, and then physical on the front end where, if I want something on VLAN 1, I just need to plug it into whichever jacks on the front of this device I've assigned to VLAN 1.
Yeah. And there are also the capabilities, I know you were talking about the ports, Mike, where you can have actually multiple VLANs assigned to a single port. So you could imagine the case where you have a Wi-Fi access point, which is broadcasting your guest network, your production network, your HR network, right? You could basically have all three VLANs come in on one physical port, but that port would support all three of those VLANs. So it's not always sort of a one-to-one physical to VLAN mapping, but you could have multiple sharing a same port.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of a scenario where that was, you were trying to talk about the wireless one there, but I was trying to think of a different scenario where I would want an individual port, which is going to talk to another device, right? to be on more than one VLAN. Can you think of another scenario besides wireless?
Well, you can think of the case where you're doing an uplink from one port to another, or sorry, from one switch to another, or from one switch to like an aggregate switch. So you need to be able to transfer all of those VLANs from that need to be transmitted from one switch to the other. And so you would have multiple VLANs on a single port.
Yeah,
Sometimes they call them
yeah,
trunked.
yeah, yeah. That's a really good analogy. Thanks. That because a VLAN, and again, for those that not familiar with the VLAN, a VLAN isn't, like you said, it's not limited to a port, but it's also not limited to a switch, right? So a VLAN could be across switches. So then you've got to have intercommunication, but then you've got to allow that communication to go. So yeah, and then you might, like you said, you might trunk multiple ports together when you're doing inter-switch communication. So let's talk about, so I still go back to my original statement that VLANs are the principal manner in which we're going to implement this.
Painter, it's like virtualization.
Yeah. I get it. I just, anyway, so let's talk about the need to talk principle. You want to talk about that, Mike? What do we mean when we talk about the need to talk?
So yeah, the need to talk principle is similar to least privilege, which is just, it's a good security strategy. The need to talk, or the need to access, however you may have heard it, or you can think of it, is whether or not it's appropriate for an end user device like a laptop to be able to connect directly to a production server. And there's a variety of reasons to determine whether that's appropriate, but that's also an exercise you have to go through, which a lot of organizations don't. So identifying your critical assets, determining, and based on that criticality, you can classify them, confidential, public, et cetera, and then determine what's appropriate from an access perspective. In this case, though, we opened the segment with an example of ransomware. Imagine a user's computer got ransomware and they had a network, there was a map drive, whenever they turn their computer on and they look at, the file explorer of my computer, and there's your S drive or your U drive. And that is an automatic, scripted mapping to a production server based on this user's credentials. Well, that ransomware now has those users' credentials and would also, by association, have access to everything that this device and that user is mapped to, like those production servers. And so, even though it's difficult and it's a burden, like security is, automatically scripting access to production systems is frowned upon.
Say that again. Automatically
scripted authentication of production servers.
Oh, okay. I understand what you're saying. Gotcha. Right. So, and I can see that, because if we think about it, would you agree that end user devices are probably the ones at most risk of being infected with ransomware, right? Does that seem like a fair? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because they're the ones, like, they're taking their laptop and they're going to Starbucks and whatever, right? And so they're getting infected in that scenario. And so this is why you have this concept of not allowing them to directly communicate with servers unless there is a reason to do so.
Servers are not proactively or mindlessly clicking on links and opening emails with attachments.
Yeah, exactly.
Not yet. I mean, we start deploying AI agents to do more. There may be a phase we go through, but currently, it's the users where
servers get bored and they start browsing the web.
So
right.
So I was just, as you guys were talking through this, I was thinking about the episode, I think a couple of weeks ago, maybe we had, where we were talking about sort of users having admin access to on their systems, right? And it's very similar in this case, right? It's like, hey, it's easier to just be like, yeah, users get access to production, whatever. I don't need to worry about authorizing access every single time someone needs it. Maybe my IT shop is a little lazy or doesn't want to deal with these issues, or the end users want certain privileges, I guess. And so it's sort of a bad design to say, hey, all the users can run as root or admin on their personal laptops. I think in the same way here, it's sort of like, okay, if you let them run with full access to production, that may be a risky maneuver.
Same thing. It's less work, just like you're saying, Mike. It's more work to do what we're saying. It's more work to segment. It's more work to say servers can't talk to laptops unless there is a particular reason for them to do so. And they can't talk to, mobile phones and, all of that kind of stuff. But
Question.
yeah,
Okay. Mike,
well, but it's a good idea to do so. Just like everything that we talk about, literally, there's nothing that we say in any part of this book where it's like, here's this thing that you could do that has no effort and great level of reward, right? There's just, everything we say, it's like, you should probably do this. There is a great amount of reward, right? A great reduction in risk. Imagine, just like, again, another previous episode, not that long ago, we talked about if you don't have business with China and Russia and other similar countries, then just don't let servers and anyone in Russia or China communicate with your servers. Just turn it off and boom. Takes a little bit of effort, huge amount of reward in terms of making sure you're not going to get stuff from that. Of course, what those guys are going to do, just hop on a VPN and pretend like they're in the US. But, again, we're trying to stop the stupid bad guys, not the smart
so
ones.
you talked about the effort, right, Curtis? And we understand that managing these environments, especially as new applications are spun up, right, new systems are brought on board, it's complicated, right? You have a network admin who's probably very overwhelmed or an IT generalist. And yes, the tools may be easier to configure it and versus what they used to be, but it's still work, it's still effort. You still need to monitor all the rest of that. And so you are managing these rules in order to allow those access. And Mike, in some of these environments, and I know you're just going to say it depends, but like how many firewall rules do you see sometimes in these? Like, is it like tens to hundreds? Is it thousands? I'm sure it varies significantly, but like these are rules that someone created, someone has to manage, right?
You're right. And I have seen quite a variety, if not the whole spectrum of like just default rules, and because we don't know, and then just overly crazy, cumbersome rules that actually cause problems. And then somewhere in between, there's also layers. So you've got your perimeter firewall, and you've got, internal firewalls. You've got firewalls for specific applications or servers or segments. There's a variety of strategy and architecture thought you can put to deployment of things at multiple layers. Firewall is one layer, segmentation is another layer. So yeah, I've seen a lot. I've seen it good and the bad, and not to say one's necessarily better than the other. It depends on the environment and the organization.
Yeah.
There's
And
probably a
and the
point.
people
Go ahead, finish, Mike.
and the people and skills that you need to manage it.
There's probably a point of decreasing marginal returns where, like, with 50 rules, you get this much, but with 400 rules, you get this much more. The one that I saw, an environment that I was at where they had all of their applications stored very sensitive information, right? And they had and they were publicly facing applications, like to the public via the internet. And what they did a really good job of is basically vertical segmentation within their environment. So if you were interfacing with this app, you got access, you and the application that you were talking to and everything that application needed to talk to was all available to that application. But if you were right next door and a server literally in the next rack, and you were talking to that application, that server couldn't talk to this server, right? So that I really like that. Now, it did end up creating an incredible pain in the butt when the crazy backup guy, wanted to talk to all the servers. That was considered like really verboten at the time, and it led to a lot of fun, which I've told
I
the story.
thought that was that story. I thought that was a story you were referring to.
It's the same story. The one that results in me losing my, and shouting
late at
out
night.
obscenities late at night. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
And Mike, you brought up a very interesting point in your last comment, which was the skills of people, right? And I think what ends up happening is a lot of what we talked about has so far been mainly about like on-premises networking infrastructure to the most part, right? When we talk about physical switches, everything else. Once you start throwing in cloud and the various ways that they protect their networks, the perimeter, their virtual data centers, whatever you want to call it, VPCs in AWS's case, right? All of that now adds a layer of complexity. And now when you try to overlay those settings, those rules would say something that also runs on premises and communicates back and forth. Now it gets very, very complicated very quickly.
It does. I will add as part of this conversation that virtualization has so many benefits, and security is one of those. If something's compromised, you just blow it away and go back to the most recent snapshot if you've got a good strategy around that. But for sure, whenever you're talking cloud, someone else's data center, whether it's co-located or truly outsourced, you're relying on all the controls and capabilities and skills of the people supporting that you don't have control over aside from your contract. And then all of the communications between you and them. So how are you syncing? How are you sending and receiving? How do we ensure that access is appropriate, and how are we monitoring all of that? And so one of the things I was going to touch on just from the last thread was the more complexity you add to your environment, the more overhead it's going to take to make sure, well, one, how do we troubleshoot what's going on? What is anomalous? How do we go through these different layers to figure out what happened? And then back to the skills, you've got to have the right people. And sometimes those people will tell you, you need all this stuff. It needs to be this complicated thing, which maybe that's because of where they came from and
Shiny new
how they
toys.
built it out of their environment, right? Or sometimes selling you this overly complex thing is their way of sometimes overselling themselves. So a word of caution there too. The more layers and things you put in place does not necessarily mean that you're more protected or that your operations are going to be more reliable. In the majority of cases that I've been involved with, it's actually been the opposite. The more complicated something is, the more difficult it is to respond and truly analyze things. It's also more difficult to manage it and keep it up and running.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because the next topic that I wanted to talk under this, and it's related to the thing that Prasanna just mentioned, which is the concept of microsegmentation, right? Where we're not just limiting things to VLANs and things like that, but we're also saying this application can only talk to this application, or this piece of storage can only talk not just to this server, but especially in a world of the cloud. Where I, for example, have seen this when, Prasanna and I used to work at a cloud backup company, and they used S3 as their target, and they had S3 configured so that only their application could write to that S3, write and read to that S3 bucket, so that even if you somehow had managed to break through all of the levels of security to get to S3, you wouldn't be able to actually read or write, because they had already configured it so that it could only talk to the appropriate application. So I like the idea of microsegmentation, but Mike, this idea, what you're saying is so true, is we can configure, just like everything else, we can configure this till the cows come home, and we can configure it so that it's so good that A, nobody can understand it, and B, we can't troubleshoot it when things, when we get a trip, that nobody understands why we got it and why we keep getting it. The more complicated we make it, even though we talk about this stuff a lot, right? We're always recommending you need to look into this, you need to look into that. But we still have to argue for simplicity, right? Complexity equals risk. Right? Doing nothing equals risk, but doing way too much equals risk. You have to find a balance between doing things that you can understand. And I do think, by the way, just that, it's been 30 seconds since we said the word AI. I do think this is an area where AI can help, where you can say, potentially you can say, here are the goals that I want to have for this organization, and that potentially AI could make a much more complicated security, security forward network and application segmentation that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And I'm really curious to know your thoughts on what I just said, that last part.
I agree with it. I agree that AI should be a good resource for organizations to assess not only what they're thinking about doing, but also what they currently have. And don't forget, and I've said it a couple times, don't forget to include your people, and whether those are internal people or your contractors, don't forget to include them in this analysis, because that's critical, especially if it's something complex. One of the biggest risks to environments that have these complex, segmentations and layers, it's usually one or two people that built that with almost no documentation. And so if you lose those people, you're in a, I don't want to say world of hurt, but that's a lot of risk to bear for someone new to come in. And I've seen this a lot, unfortunately, or coincidentally. The last couple of environments where I've seen a new person come in into an environment that's overly complex, it was usually pretty close to an incident, ransomware or something else. And they're trying to figure stuff out while the house is on fire. And they're figuring it out, but they also don't have time to document any of it. So it's still not documented. But I've seen a lot of environments where all these great things are in place, sometimes more than you need. And that person, walks off the job or isn't available anymore. And people have no idea. One other thing I'm going to add real quick about microsegmentation, and you touched on it briefly, Curtis. This application can only talk to that backend database or that bucket. A lot of times, that authentication is hard coded somewhere. It's saved credentials or cached credentials, or it's in a script, or it's a service account. And again, years later, we're doing some other kind of audit or assessment, and we find these things and we're like, what's this for? And nobody knows. So we turn it off and things break, or we delete that account, or, we update the code. It's not documented. It's hard coded. It's bad practice. And in a lot of cases, it's really not necessary. There's other ways to do this than some of these one-to-one authentication approaches.
Would you say though, Mike, that example you just gave where you're using some sort of credential or service account or whatever else to talk to another between two services, that network microsegmentation is an additional layer? Like, it's not an either or, right? It's just an additional benefit to the authentication, such that if someone stole those credentials and, say, tried to access that server from a different machine or something else, that the microsegmentation can help at least isolate and protect that endpoint rather than leave it completely wide open.
And I got pretty granular with credentials, but a step up from that is just, the trust relationship. Is it one-way trust? Is it bilateral trust? I mean, that's been around forever. And those are appropriate because that's a setting, right? So that's not credentials. That's tokens or Kerberos ticket or whatever. That's a setting, and those are appropriate. Those are, very prevalent and good best practice if you can put the time into making sure it's set up right and documenting it. But no, you're right. I think if you can start with network segmentation in general, put your production environment in its own segment, determine how to restrict or what's appropriate for other devices and users to access that segment, and the behavior, like what does the network traffic look like? What do the trusts look like? In a lot of cases, the majority of cases, that approach is going to satisfy your objectives, your security objectives, your resilience, your backups, your protection from ransomware. That's going to do the majority of the heavy lifting. If you really have sensitive systems, maybe you're a CPA firm and you've got all this tax data, you can do more. I don't know that the very technical approach to microsegmentation that we've been talking about is necessary, but there's other security approaches, with dongles or tokens, the YubiKeys and some other things. Um, that could probably be more user friendly and manageable than the very technical approach to microsegmentation that would take some skill and some strategy.
And it's
So
very
I think,
fragile.
yeah, I think I like this idea. Again, we're in sort of the action items part of the recording here. I like this idea of first just sort of segmenting production from test dev and from end user devices, right? If we could create those three segments, and then I'd say the next step past that is when you look at your production environment, most applications are they're you start with like a web server in the front end, and you have a database server, an application server behind that, and whatever you've got, you might have a whole number of things behind, but you could say, well, my devices only need to be able to talk to the web server. They don't need to be able to talk to all these other servers. This server needs to be able to talk to those servers. So you can start with sort of a basic thing like that. Like you said, I like the idea of separating the dev and test. There's no reason the dev and test need to talk to production. Well, there's one reason I can think of, but again, it's an occasional reason. And I like the idea of restricting the end user devices in their own little, LAN ghetto, right? So that they're not allowed to, talk to things. Again, anytime you do this, you just have to, we've said this before, it's an on high thing. You need support from the people above you, because once you start doing this, you're going to step on some toes. You're going to hurt some apps, and you're going to, and so what you do, it's this whole thing of like, we turn on the new feature and then we wait, right? We wait for people to call the thing. Okay, it's been 15 minutes and nobody's called, right? Again, I'll give you a story from back in the day. There was this server. It was called Snazzy. I still remember the name. It was a little HP UX box, this little tiny thing. And I had been told a lot of times backups would break on this box, and I didn't know why. I was a brand new Unix guy, right? And I was told that when that happens, you just reboot the server, right? And so one day this was happening, and so I rebooted the server, and then all of a sudden, whoop, 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 people are literally running into the server room. They're, what's going on with Snazzy? I'm like, it's rebooting. They're like, that's our communication. That is the server through which we communicate to the mainframe in Dallas. The mainframe that has all our money, and we're a credit card company. Yeah. So you're going to break things, but you need to be prepared. The management needs to prepare, and they need to support you. We're going to do this. We're doing this for a reason, and we're doing this, in a way that we're trying not to step on as many toes as we can. But anyway, I'll step.
But
down
I
on
think
my
also you
soapbox.
could just, like you said, you do it in a phased approach, right? You start with those 4 groups, right? Production, right? Test and dev, end users. And then you could honestly just leave everything open on your production, and then over time just start locking it down,
Yeah,
right?
and you
then seeing what
monitor,
breaks.
right?
Yeah.
Leave it open and monitor, right? Mike, can you talk about that a little bit? How do we monitor inter VLAN traffic? How do we figure that out?
There's an interface for that.
Yeah.
And then there's a variety of tools, both free like Spiceworks or SolarWinds from a network operations perspective. You can monitor a number of different attributes of your network across those VLANs, because it's essentially looking at traffic and whether you have that inside a segment or enterprise-wide firewall all the way out to the perimeter. But that's really just network attributes. So bandwidth, thresholds on packets, users, machines, health, is someone trying to print across different segments. You can see all those protocols, all that good stuff. From a cybersecurity perspective, very similarly, you would put a collector within each segment that doesn't have trust. So any truly segmented part of your network, it would have to have its own collector, or we call them sensors. And then you would push all the syslog and agent data to that collector. That collector would then meet up with other collectors and consolidate before it goes out through the firewall to a cloud data lake. And that's where we
That-
would run all this analysis
Would
on.
that be a collector of collectors?
Be a collector collection. A
Collector
collection
collection.
collector. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, hey, I think this has been a good recording. We got, we get in the weeds on how to do this, and obviously the implementation is going to vary from environment to environment, right? And how you actually do the dragging and dropping. And I think Mike is recommending that everybody just go back to old school LANs, not VLANs, just ports on a switch, no AI, no V anything, just
Not recommending that.
mark of the day.
Although I'll tell you, the new generation of hack, the older guys are they've finally filled their nest egg and they're on a beach somewhere, or they finally moved out of mom's house. But a lot of the newer guys don't know how to hack some of the legacy stuff. Old IBM, Big Blue hardware, Novell. They have no idea how to hack a Novell, even though there's good stuff out there for how to do it. So I'm not saying, simple network, flat network is bad, as long as it's appropriate for your environment,
Right.
and your risk profile. But yeah, there's any number of things, segmentation, load balancers, firewalls at the application, network, even operating system level. I mean, there's a ton of resources out there. You just have to do an analysis. You have to know yourself and what you're trying to do, what your objectives
Right.
are, and where everything is, that inventory, and then figure out the best approach to protecting it all.
Well, Prasanna, thanks again. You got to show off your VLAN expertise there.
This is what I've been doing at home the last couple years, Curtis. Got to try things out for once.
All right. And once again, thanks again, Mike, for being on the pod.
You're welcome.
All right. And thanks to our listeners. You are why we do this. I hope you're enjoying this. Give us a comment, give us a shout out, recommend the pod to other people, and tell them to buy the dang book while they're at it. There you go. The Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery by W. Curtis Preston and Dr. Mike Saylor. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.